I would like to welcome Will Nemo to today's edition of the Men's Room Show.
Thank you, Linda, for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm really excited to be able to jump into today's topic, which is the mindset that you have shaped in your life and relationships back when you were in your 20s, fast forwarding to your 30s. And I think that what you're going to share today will give a lot of perspectives for our listeners to really think about, um, taking your experience and what you've experienced and what you've learned along the way. So, what better way uh, to go down this path than to turn the mic over to you and to go ahead and jump right into it?
Thank you, Linda. Um, I'm going to start kind of with a story of high school and heartbreak. Um, I didn't really date in school or like whatever dating was back in 2007. Um, Prior to Instagram, prior to Tinder, prior to Bumble, just you have to realize that the landscape 15 years ago even was extremely different than it is now with our swipe right, swipe left culture. And technology didn't move nearly as fast as it does now. And I'm not saying that technology is the root cause of some of the dating issues that I personally have seen in the last 5, 10, 15 years. But um, realistically, I grew up in a small town. Um, Dating options relatively small, right? I graduated with a high school class of 15 people. Um, and there are certain things that I know about myself now that I didn't know back then. I didn't realize that I had certain autistic tendencies. I didn't realize that I was being shaped by my family's values, traditions, and cultures. I didn't have a great male role model in that regard. My dad wasn't the most emotionally equipped to be a parent. Um, so I've had it. I have what I realize now was a what they call a attachment, or it's not a disorder, but I had an unsecure attachment style, because I was trying to replicate what I had at home when I was meeting other people, specifically the opposite sex women. Um, and very, I didn't learn any of these terms until much later, until about 2017. But back then in 2007, and then 10 years difference, um, I realized through high school that I would do this thing called pedestalization, or putting someone above myself, and also running scenarios in my head where, hey, what would it be like to be with this person, without ever really engaging with this person, nor having the proper social skills to learn how to flirt. For example, most people don't know how to flirt positively, because it's not a learned social skill. It's something that has been put on the back burner, especially in the last 30 years, um, because we don't meet face to face as much as we used to in the past. There's no such thing as a social hop where you go and intermingle with the opposite sex anymore. It's just not really uh, it's just not really a thing. Even back then, things were starting to change rapidly, and I was attached to a person um, in a very un unhealthy way, um, and it it shaped some of my early uh, interactions with women, and they weren't positive, right? Because you would show affection or interest, and if that affection and or interest wasn't reciprocated, the relationship, or what you considered a relationship, it wouldn't progress, because you just, it's unacquainted, like it wouldn't be reciprocated. So it would put you kind of into what they would now call maybe a depression cycle or a doom spiral. At least for me, like I didn't know how to deal with the feelings of rejection. And men on average get rejected a lot more than women, because from the historical perspective and even the anthropological perspective, we are the general pursuers. It's just how things evolved, right? Women generally don't ask men out. It just doesn't happen, right? And even if you ask somebody out, there's only a 50-50 chance they're going to say yes or they're going to say no, right? And if it progresses and moves on, well, there's still another 50-50 chance that you're not going to end up together and have happily ever after. I think unrealistically, on both sides of the fence, we have been sold what they call a Disneyfied version of reality in relationships, where the girl ends up with the prince and the princess, and we can all find what they call our soulmate, right? It's called the soulmate myth, and I didn't learn about the soulmate myth until I read a book by Rollo Tomasi. It's called The Rational Male. And if I had had this sort of literature back when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, I think my interactions with women would have been a lot smoother, because I wouldn't have put so much pressure on myself to be with one specific person, or pedestalization and or oneitis. Oneitis is the attachment to one person to the exclusion of all else. And like I said, running scenarios in my head where, oh, I'm going to be with this person and we're going to get married and we're going to have kids and all of this stuff. And it's, it's really hard, because men especially, and young people especially, their brains are still developing, and they're not fully developed until they're into the mid-20s. And I really really struggled at first through 2007 to 2010. Like it happened to me on multiple occasions where I would take an interest in somebody and it wasn't reciprocated, or they were technically dating someone else at the time, but at the same time, the landscape in that regard, what does dating mean, right? Is that exclusive to one person? Are you um, dating multiple people at the same time to see if you actually enjoy being around that person? There's no set one, or there's no set one rule or set of rules that govern all of this. And one of the things that, especially, and like I'm talking about specifically North American culture, because other cultures view courtship and dating extremely differently to North America. Traditionally speaking, marriage and all that stuff happened for the acquisition of wealth and the combination of families to build a proper family um, unit. And after the 70s, and especially with like women's liberation, whatever you want to call it, I don't know how to explain it. It's called third wave feminism. There was an extreme empowerment movement, especially through the 90s and early 2000s. For women to not settle, and it extremely accelerated through the mid-teens with social media, Tinder, Bumble, a lot of the swipe right apps, which at the time they were kind of garnered as like, hey, this is kind of cool. Like I can just sit on my couch and swipe right, and I can go meet people, and we can go on a date, and I can skip the awkward trying to, pick up somebody in a bar or a coffee shop, or um, it basically put the dating market, like what they call the dating market is called like the sexual market value place. Um, and prior to the internet, we didn't have forums for this thing. And men and women, especially, didn't have an outlet to talk to one another and have discussions about what it's like to be a male or be a female, biologically speaking. I know we've entered into a weird kind of, I wouldn't call it a dystopia, but it's a weird place, especially through the mid teens, like 2016 onward. We've seen a real, I think personally, a division of the sexes and genders. And I'm not really an expert at all of this, but it definitely stems a lot from the wokeism and or progressive movement, which kind of says, hey, you can be your own special little snowflake and you deserve everything in the world, and you're entitled to have this and you're entitled to have that. But realistically, you know, you can't have everything you want if you don't work on yourself personally and come from a place of strong, like a strong self-esteem, a strong sense of self. If you're not feeling confident in yourself, how are you going to ever conquer the fear, especially myself, to conquer the fear of rejection? Um, and in my early years, like I went traveling back east, and I did meet a girl, and that was the first technical relationship or girlfriend I ever had. And it was good to the point where like we got along really well, except she lived in Quebec and I'm from BC. So there was a bit of a cultural learning curve there, and I learned to speak French in a year. But ultimately, there was some betrayals that happened on both sides, especially because French European culture is very different when it comes to dating, right? They don't have a sense of what we would call monogamy or dating one person exclusively. They tend to date around because it's more culturally and sexually acceptable to do so, whereas the English are more, I would say, sexually prudent or more prudes in that regard. And back then, I didn't really know how to accept that reality. It wasn't something I'd been used to. I'd grown up very conservatively. And ultimately, I was a lot younger. I was 21, 22. I was in Quebec. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have a lot of work prospects. My French was intermediate at best. I was missing my family, and um, it was a great time. At the same time, I was coming into my own person, and I really didn't come into my own person until I made a decision at 24 to really um, stop chasing other people and start working on myself. And that meant, hey, I got to go back to school and finish my electrical trade. And I want to be able to be a productive member of society and be able to support myself and maybe be closer to my family for a bit, because I just ultimately, as much as I wanted to stay in Quebec, it just wasn't economically, emotionally, or spiritually feasible for me to be there. So I had to break up with this person, and intermittently, there was another girl there that I was interested in, and nothing happened specifically, but it was an emotional betrayal of this other relationship. And she had personally done the same thing to me during the year earlier while I was teaching English. So it just goes to show it doesn't matter necessarily how much you love someone or there is an attraction or an interest. We have this tendency, especially I think anthropologically, to be interested in more than one person, either in a sexual way, an emotional way, a spiritual way. And I personally have had a hard time maintaining relationships like platonic relationships with women. I don't necessarily agree or feel that platonic relationships are a possibility, like because you're always going to be emotionally or spiritually or even potentially sexually attracted to the other person. And if you're in another relationship and if you don't have the emotional maturity to deal with a lot of these feelings and what they call situationships. I'm not sure, Linda, have you heard of the term situationship before?
Yes, I have. You have unpacked so many themes here. And so we're going to tackle them one by one. But yes, a situationship really is that word that you may not be in a committed relationship with somebody, but you're more than friends. It's usually kind of how that is. Um, and it can be confusing. Is it okay if I go ahead and take it from here?
Yeah, no, I no, it's your show. I just laid out my story up until about the year that was 2013, 2014, and then like I said, I started working on myself. I started going to the gym. I started finding more valuable jobs, and I kind of put a lot of the dating stuff on the back burner because my new what they call mental point of origin was myself, not other people, men or women. I was just, let's start focusing on Will. Like, make Will a project for the next 4 to 5 years and see how things go.
Yes, Project Me is really important. And, you know, coming into yourself from your 20s to your 30s, you're right. Biologically, it's proven and scientifically documented that your brain does not fully develop until you're 26. So that is very true. And you talked about attachment styles being important, and you brought up the why men have a harder time with rejection because they're doing more of the asking traditionally. Um, and you've also talked about there being a division of the genders. So those three things right there, I've observed as well. The coming into self is really like, you learn from what your parents do or do not do. So that is usually your only model that you have until you get access to resources or experiences that tell you something different. Um, I will say that the whole definition of what dating means has significantly changed over the years, because not only is it time bound, or whether dating could mean, like you said, you could be dating one person exclusively in a monogamous relationship, or you could be getting to know several people at one time and deciding who best fits into what you value, what you want, what they want and value. And it's more about experiencing without being committed to any one person. And so when the definition of what dating is unclear, and you combine it to what you're bringing, or how your parents brought you up or didn't bring you up, it can be a really confusing time. And so when it's confusing, that's when you get into these different even attachment styles matter, right? Whether you're secure and comfortable with the level of intimacy and independence that you experience, or whether you're maybe someone that's a little more anxious, avoidant, or maybe even fearful because of your past experiences. So there's so many different dynamics. So we talked about the dynamic of family structure and how they brought you up. We've talked about how you're oriented as far as your attachment style. And then we get into what does dating mean to me? And what does it mean to the person that I want to enter into it? And so it all becomes this time where if you don't talk about these things when you meet people, you can end up in a place where you're feeling rejected, not seen. You might end up, like you had mentioned, is putting people on a pedestal where you don't really consider your own needs first. And I think that all of those things, it's really like you mentioned, it's best to go back to the project me and putting your goals, needs, and values, in the forefront. So do things for you that make you happy. And when you're meeting different people, do talk about what your definition of dating is and isn't, and find out what the other person is valuing. I think that that's like really important. But what I also heard you say, which I think is relevant and very important, is instead of investing all of your time into like putting this value on navigating dating and not really putting focus on self previously, moving back to working on yourself, doing that first, all of the other things are going to come into play in a much more healthy way. And I mean, you're also talking about, whether or not men and women can be platonic friends. Um, I think, yes, you can, but there's going to be times where you're going to have, like you said, emotional, spiritual, and sexual thoughts that are going to come up, and you're going to have to decide, are you going to act or not act on them? And if you know that you are challenged in that, then maybe the platonic opposite sex relationships aren't ones that you typically want to pursue unless you choose to be with people that have different, um, I guess, cultural values that would be okay to, have opposite sex friends. You're agree that dating really means that you can see more than one person at a time to get to know people, unless you say you're exclusive. Having all of those different like conversations. And where I wanted to go with this is it all boils down or goes back to your mindset. You're right. And really like getting yourself in a healthy state. So knowing that you are going after how you want to physically show up, the health of your body, how you want to be educated, whether you're self-taught or you're out there learning a trade, be, because you got to be somebody that you're happy with before you go and think about even entering into any type of relationships that where you want it to go further. And I will say that I have noticed one thing, like in young people, and I'm not sure where it comes from, but there's this really strong desire to have to know the life trajectory when you meet a person, where it's going to go. Like, I need to know that we
Can I tell you why that's important, Linda?
yes,
With
because
it, with
I like to understand it because I've observed it. Mhm.
with an anecdote. And if you're talking about young people, or you're talking about people under the age of 35, we have to.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so
Younger people under, I'm talking actually probably between that 20 and 30.
yeah,
Yes.
so
Mhm.
yeah, and generationally speaking, just so we're talking the same language here,
Yes.
millennials technically are from the year 1981 until 1994 or 96.
Mhm.
Onwards is Gen Z, which goes up until 2012, and then alphas are after that. So I am right in the middle of the millennial generation, and I am basically a hybrid of both old school thinking and new school thinkings, which gives me a very unique perspective on this entire situation. And coming back to why young people especially I think Gen Z, because they've seen a lot of divorce, Linda. They've
I
they've
agree.
they've seen their parents, and they've seen their Gen X parents and their Boomer parent. They've seen their parents split. So they're a generation of blended families, and it's really for them. They're moving back. We're seeing the pendulum actually swing back to more of a traditional mindset, traditional values, because if they meet someone or a partner, potentially male or female, and their intentions aren't set from the beginning, um, there is always going to be a time limit on how long a relationship is going to last, whether it's a year, 2 years, 7 years, 8 years, or till death do us part. To death do us part doesn't really mean much anymore because of no fault divorce. No fault divorce changed the landscape in the 70s and beyond. So for a man, especially, it's extremely potentially dangerous to get involved in a long-term committed relationship without knowing the full intentions of the woman, especially because if they can walk away with the assets and the children, and the men still have to pay alimony depending on what state or province you live in, and they're not able to see their kids except on weekends or every other weekend, and they're now part of a blended family or co-parenting relationship, it puts a lot of pressure uh, on both sides, but especially the man, because it's a requirement now for a man to be, I didn't explain this earlier in my notes I sent to you, but there's this thing called the six sixes, and it's like 600 horsepower car, 6 foot tall, 6 inches in the pants, six-figure job, like the whole package. And we're seeing this in countries like Japan, where men are just bowing out of the sexual marketplace altogether. And in North America, it's just like, well, it's just easier to be gay. Like, not like I'm not trying to like bash on the whole scenario, but um when you're faced with the improbability that this isn't going to work out in a year or 5 years or 7 years, or you're not going to be able to trust the intentions of the woman long term because of hypergamy, which is the tendency for women to date up to a higher socioeconomic class, right? And it's 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 uh it's very important to get those things out of the way. And anecdotally, I'm going to say, in the last after I came out of my first like wake up period from 2014 into 2018, I did get involved with a relationship with a woman that was, approaching the age of 30. We were both just out of our 20s and like heading into our 30s. And I specifically asked, like, is it kids or is it travel? Like this is a choice like we're gonna make here, because you can either be double income, no kids, and which is like an acronym is DINKS, or you're gonna go into your 30s thinking that you're going to have the picket fence, the house, and the kids. And it's not that you can't have both, but you have to be very clear that especially in North America and Canada, to raise a kid, it's going to be $250,000 per kid from age 0 to 18. So it's an endeavor that you have to go into with extremely open eyes. And if you go into these things blindly, or if you're going around thinking you can just hook up with anything that moves, and you end up with a Tinder pregnancy or a Bumble pregnancy, then you're responsible for that person, that kid that you've created. And women go, and have the option of having an abortion, but it's an extremely emotionally charged thing. And I can't even really speak to that. But in Canada, you can just walk into a clinic and get it done. But there's other options. There's adoptions. There's et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm personally going to like, this is my prediction. Um, my prediction is, like I said, I didn't really state this at the very beginning, but um, after that relationship with that girl kind of cratered in 2020 because she wanted to go down a different route. She kind of changed her mind halfway through an 18, like 12 to 18-month courtship, and everyone's entitled to change their mind. That's fine. But there's this thing in popular psychology, especially in the red pill philosophy. It's called the wall. And for women, it can occur at, you know, an earlier stage or a later stage. But the wall is the biological point where it's harder to conceive children for a woman. And as you age into your 30s and possibly into your 40s, it gets harder. So this is why we have things like freezing your eggs or in vitro fertilization. It's because we're trying to have everything, but it's not necessarily possible if you're not of a certain economic class and you haven't planned for it long term. So I noticed a change in this person, but it was a deceptive change because they weren't going to tell me straight out what they wanted. I ended up being the and women do this, like they show off their man to their friend groups, and they also, like, if they go, like, we went to the point of meeting each other's family sort of thing, right? And like I went all the way back uh to New Brunswick, and we did that whole thing in July of 2019. And I realized that in that summer that it wasn't going to work long term because you could tell, like, this person was super into dogs, and they changed, like they treated their dogs like children in that sense. And we're our expectations and our attachment styles were extremely, after 6 months, 8 months, like 6 months of dating, like we were out of the honeymoon phase, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the honeymoon phase is a real thing where you put up a representation of yourself to the other person, and until you're out of the honeymoon phase, and long term courtship should, in certain psychology books, courtship should take at least 2 years. And that's not necessarily with cohabitation, right? Cohabitation is a separate thing, at least in certain provinces and states and jurisdictions. If you live with a person for more than 6 months, you are now technically legally under their eyes of the federal or whatever system you're under. You're now um, legally, on paper, what they would call not married per se, but there's another term for it.
Common law marriage is
Common
what
law, yeah,
they
common
call
law marriage, and especially if you have children with that person. So, and that just complicates the entire landscape altogether. And if you're raised in a more traditional background, it's interesting. It's really interesting to see how this has progressed, because you don't know, and you can't read other people's thoughts, and people change and people evolve, and then later on, year and a half later, you find out the person that you were with is with another guy and has had a kid and has a house and is settled down. It's just like, well, you should have told, like, if that's how you felt, then I wish that you had told me that midway through, And we could have we could have amicably made a split and said, hey, if that's what you want, you go do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. Let's not draw this out for another 6 months, because that's another 6 months that there's just too much emotional damage and draining that was going on. And I was also, doing my own experiments with other substances at the time. Like, I was trying to expand my consciousness at the time, and this person wasn't on that track. They wanted to live in a more third dimensional reality where I'm more looking at the bigger picture of my life and my vision and what sort of legacy I want to leave on the world. And that's maybe not necessarily having children or a picket fence or a house. Um, but for me, my ultimate goal was freedom from the the rat race, in a sense, and that's still my ultimate goal. So if you're not on that trajectory with me, or actively supporting that trajectory, or on a similar path of freedom from the system, we're not going to be compatible long term. And I've learned that about myself right out the gate. It's just, it's really hard nowadays, because like I've tried to just do the traditional, let's ask somebody out that I find attractive, let's go have coffee. And you still, like, you can train yourself to get over the rejection, but it's still rejection, and it still hurts at a fundamental level. But as you do more of it, you get better at it. But what I'm finding personally is that I'm going back to more project me, more of a MGTOW path. And for lack of a better word, like they call it monk mode, where you go to work, you go to the gym, you read books,
Yeah, and I
you go
think
on
that
podcasts, you talk about your
no, everything you're saying, Will, is so important. And there's a lot of things that you have a strong foundation on. And it comes back to, yes, you can communicate these things that you want, because you've taken time to know yourself and what you want and how to communicate them. But the stickler in this whole thing is, you don't know when you're going to go into a relationship, even though you shared, this is my trajectory, this is what I want, this is what I need, and you turn the tables around and also ask the person in that honeymoon phase, they may or may not choose to be vulnerable enough and courageous enough to tell you what they really want, because they want to say what needs to be said, in order to keep the relationship going, because in that time, in that moment, that's what they want. And you know uh being able to have these conversations all throughout the relationship are important, because you're right, people do evolve, they do change, they might decide that they want something different. But I mean, you just said it, if somebody doesn't tell you, you can't read their mind. And so it goes back to that whole philosophy, is if you love and care about somebody, and you are not honest with yourself, and then you're also not honest with the other person about when these things change and communicating them, then the other person doesn't get the chance to decide whether they want to go with you or not. And then, time goes on, and then you lose ground on parts of your life that you can't get back. And that's not fair to either person to do that. And so really, I feel like where we're at a loss in society is that uh, we're not being the best communicators, because we either haven't experienced it well enough from a model of some sort, meaning parents, or we didn't necessarily get in front of resources that can explain these things to us. And so that is the bigger thing that needs to happen. And um, working on yourself is the best thing that you can do because I always have felt, at least later in life, that your relationship should be that extra. You should be that person that makes your own self happy, doing what you love and enjoy. Being able to live in your own skin is really essentially important. And then when you get into a relationship with somebody and want to have that longer term relationship, it's not a need to be for the other person. We used to always say that my other half, my best half. It's like, no, you're whole, and the other person should also bring in their whole self. That's what needs to happen at the end of the day, is that two whole people come together because they choose to. They've communicated fully what they want, need, and desire in their relationship. And they are courageous and vulnerable enough to say at any time if something has changed. Because I will tell you, in a long-term relationship, you are going to go through changes and evolve, and it will cause, I guess I would say that it can cause hardship. If you don't talk to and address it, you have people that will shut down. You have people that may even go the other extreme, where they're vocally saying, "You don't see me, you don't hear me. Get with the program," and so you've got to learn how to have these conversations in a healthy, constructive way. And in a relationship, you don't want to be putting everything into the other person to make them happy. No, you should be putting things into yourself to make yourself happy, and then coming together and really nurturing that relationship. It's not like you get married, have your two kids, have your house, let's say, and then you turn off trying to look good for your partner. You turn off wanting to be educated. You turn off wanting to have certain dreams. No, no, you are entitled to have all of those things. And so what I would like to see is society going back to educating. Maybe, I don't know where, but maybe it starts in the schools, but having more education awareness about working on Project Me. Because when you work on Project Me, all the other things are going to come together. And learning how to communicate. Oh my gosh. That is one thing that I needed to learn, is how to communicate and advocate for my needs of what I want, need, and desire. And my spouse will tell you that when I was on a mission to do a transformational fitness program, I said, I am doing this for me. If you get the residual that you like the way that I look, and how I have more energy when we're doing things, all is great, but I'm doing this for me. It's not a for you thing. And I would say that, and he was supportive in my journey to get to that place. We figured out what to buy for groceries. I had protected time to go to the gym, work with trainers, do all these things. And because I advocated, that's what I needed. And he was willing to support me in that development, because ultimately at the end of the day, he wins too. Having someone that's available, that has energy and is fit, is a great thing, because it means that you can, live a longer, fuller life. So all is good. But, the moment that I thought that I was doing something to be attractive for him, because that's what he wanted, the trophy wife, then all bets were off, because I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't going to lose myself into satisfying somebody else. I did it for me. And if someone benefits, that's a great thing. So that's just one example that I'm thinking about, how,
Can I
people
just
go through life. Yes.
can I just interject here, because there's some couple of things that you said
Oh, great. Go ahead.
that caught my attention. So
Mhm.
the word entitlement.
Yes.
Okay, unfortunately, um, whether you believe this or not, you're not necessarily entitled to anything sometimes, right?
No, you have to
Because
work for it.
right, but if there is a culture out there, especially within women, who I'm not saying that this is, because this is back to all women are like this. Not all women are like this. Linda, you have to remember that you are an exception, right?
Yeah.
Not all women are like you.
No, they're not.
And what I'm saying is that there has been a culture of unfortunate entitlement within at least North American culture, because I don't see this in European culture as much, and I don't see that in Eastern culture as much, like India, Indonesia, Thailand, China, per se, because there's more of a difference or more of a um, there's more of a general it's men aren't necessarily put to the side over there, right? We see this with shows like The Simpsons, right, where the patriarch of the house is kind of portrayed as a dope. Okay, and that's not fair, to be honest. And what I'm saying is there seems to be a mismatch of expectations on both sides of the equation. And also, like, within um the emerging sexual orientations that there are, right? Because you may not necessarily just be heterosexual or cisgender, or right, there's so many different orientations that you can be emotionally attracted to somebody versus their biological sex, or their character versus their sex. So we have to be very aware that this is an extremely, I think, charged subject. I think there's a lot of emotion around it, and also it's a extremely new, I think, phenomenon, because we've gotten to the point where our basic our basic needs are met. We have food, shelter, and, like, a lot of that stuff are met. So now we're moving to the hierarchy of needs on Maslow's pyramid of needs. So we're moving into sex, we're moving into affection, we're moving into self-esteem, we're moving towards the highest potential of ourselves. And when we start moving into those categories, we, like you said, you are influenced by your parents, you're influenced by society, you're influenced by movies, right? There is a there is an extreme expectation on both sides that you're going to check all of the boxes, and necessarily that may not work. There may have to be new emerging um, dating dynamics where maybe you have a primary partner, but you have an additional partner that you do other things with, or the other concept of it takes a village to raise a child. Because back in the day, like way back hunter gatherer days, and still, if you go into the jungles of Brazil or some of these other remote areas, people don't know the parenthood of some of these childs, because the concept is everyone in the village takes care of all of the children, not just two parents or that sort of thing. And it's just, we're extremely, I think, North Americanized to the concept of this duality. And I don't truly believe that duality is a long term a great solution to where we're at. Because I think we, like you said, we evolve as people. We want different things. We want different spiritual things. We want different fitness goals. We want, like, we're trying to have the cake and we're trying to eat it at the same time. And if you take more of a, like I said, a four-dimensional view of what's going on, and if you're trying to do what's right for you, communication is probably the starting point. Knowing what you want is another good thing, but that takes time. Like, meant, like, we're always evolving. What I wanted at 24 is not what I wanted at 34, and what I want at 34 is not going to be what I want at 44. And I now have a concept of who I am as a person that I didn't have 10 years ago. And I have resources now and books I can confer to that help me navigate the sexual marketplace, which realistically is 8 billion people, half of which are women, half of which are men. So if you have access to so much choice, and we've made it the ability to swipe right on the couch, then basically what you've done is you've put people into a complete, what they call, um, in marketing, in churn, where you've got them addicted to the cycle of the dopamine, which unfortunately, if you especially have grown up post 1995, you were literally born into it, unfortunately. I didn't have a cell phone growing up. A I didn't have a smartphone. Didn't have any of those things. So I was more grounded to the reality around me. And unfortunately, I think in like the under 35 generation, or the 18 to 30 demographic, if that's who we're talking about or talking to, that's who specifically I'm trying to help with my Doomer Bloomer initiative and my All Truths initiative and my Yukon Gold initiative. Everything that I'm trying to build on my Substacks, on my podcasts, on my writings, it's about my journey through my teens, 20s, and into my 30s, because it's very difficult to know where you're going if you don't have a roadmap. And unfortunately for me, one of my Achilles heels has been the dating network, because I truly believe, especially from a lot of the psychology books that I've read and things like Think and Grow Rich, if you can find a person or a partner that helps you meld two minds together, you can build a bigger and grander reality for both of you. And it's unfortunate that you have to go through a lot of churn and a lot of ghosting, like when people talk to you and then just disappear, or if you ask someone out for coffee and it's just like either a hard no, or like a mate, like it's a very like they're it's a very like a flaky interaction. And if we're not meeting people in the real world, like IRL, and we're always talking on our phones or through our phones, we tend to just, at least for me personally, we tend to regress to our baseline social interactions. Like for me, it's just I talk to people at work, I go home, I read books, I watch shows, I learn how to do computer programming, I go to the gym, working on me. I would like to try to throw in a more social interaction, but depending on where you are, where you live, that's not necessarily always possible, because personally, I'm sober. I don't drink anymore. So meeting someone at the bar or in a location where there's loud music where I can't talk is not a possibility. So where do I go? Do I go to a meetup for dancing? I'm not a great dancer. I don't feel comfortable dancing. It's not a great place for me to interact. I like to do things outside. I like to read books, so I go to coffee shops. But not everybody nowadays, especially, like, I'm not going to say that this is the main culprit or the main cause, but post COVID, people tended to withdraw, because it was at that time you were told don't go outside, stay 6 feet away from people, and don't make eye contact and wear a mask. So how do we navigate a world where you're stuck and glued to your phone, you don't have good social skills, and or maybe you have autistic tendencies, and both genders and every in between may be a little bit flaky? How, like, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I have heard a lot of what you're talking about, that it's hard to meet people because of the whole in real life versus online, the flakiness of people when you do take it offline to even meet them in person, and just growing up, just sharing the reality that a lot of kids are are growing up in the dopamine world because COVID changed how we live today. It just like took us off our course, and
Mhm.
people are having to learn how to communicate in real person, in real life again, because you're right. We were told to stay away, stay healthy, be in your bubble, so you can stay protected. But what kind of life is that when you stay in your bubble? You don't go out to meet people. You forgot how to use body language and voice intonation to get to know people. And you're also right too, when you're in a situation where maybe the common way it used to be is you get to be 21 plus, you go to a bar, well, depending on the age group or age limit, it could be 19 in Canada, I think it is. Because yeah, because if everyone thinks they have to have a drink in the hand or a substance to meet people in a bar, and you're not into that, then your options start to dwindle. And I've spoken to men in your age group about what they're doing differently to meet people. And I take it back down to basics. Know yourself, work on yourself, know what you're into and what you're not, and look for spaces and places where those people hang out. And I will tell you that one of someone that I've talked to, this was really interesting. This person was really interested in learning about a lot of different cultures, languages, um, just things in general. And then they started automatically going to libraries. So they ended up in the library because they didn't really want to do the whole bar scene. They didn't necessarily want to, like you were saying, if you're great, if you're good at dancing, great, you could sign up for a class, but maybe you're not. And so they really like the outdoors and nature and travel and all these things. So they started hanging out at the library, learning about things about themselves, their cultures and whatnot. And guess what happened? There are other people there doing a similar thing. They've had the best conversations and meetups and I thought, the library. I had never thought about the library being a place to meet people and to go into rich depth. But if you think about it, people in the library, they're thirsty and hungry for learning about other things. That's and I thought, well, maybe that's the perfect place to hang out. I don't know. And because I've heard of more than one person doing this, because I've always said, you can even, drum up a conversation with normal places you frequent, like the grocery store or a church, or like if you're a runner, you could go find a meetup of people running. So you just got to think about and get creative about the places that you want to frequent and the things that you want to do. Go to the places and spaces where that happens and worry less about what mainstream tells you that you got to meet people at a club or a bar with a drink in the hand, because the best relationships happen when you show up in those places where people are doing what you're interested in. It just magically happens. It gets much easier. um the still the same rules apply. It's like, oh, how do I open up and ask somebody out without being too forward, too aggressive, too creepy, because safety first, when you're out doing these things. And how I had to answer to that too. And it's like, well, how do you get a woman's number because you want to see her again? And I said, talk to her in such a way that she's asking for yours. In some cases it does happen. Or frequenting a place so you meet somebody, have a conversation with, go hang out there again, see if they show up, and nurture the conversations and interactions, so then it becomes a mutual thing that could happen. And because a connection is formed, and there's a lower chance of the whole rejection thing. But be okay with being rejected, because the biggest gift that someone gave me in all shapes, forms, circumstances, things in life, is that rejection is redirection. It means you're not incongruent or alignment with that thing. And so be glad to get that gift, because you wouldn't want to waste your time and energy on something that it's not for you. And and when I started thinking about that, mindset in that way, life became easier in a lot of areas. And so I think, young people getting to know themselves is the best advice. Learning to communicate and to go into spaces that you're interested in, good. And then really learn how to just to have a conversation without the outcome having to be, I must leave the conversation with phone number in hand. Give it a little bit of chance, and seeing if the person frequents that place again, and get to know them, and have be natural in the conversation. I think if you try less and let things flow and be, that things will come your direction, because you're not chasing after things and people and for outcomes. The moment you become a chaser, all bets are off. And that's just a generality there that I'm giving you, that I found the less you chase, the more you accept uncertainty. And if something's meant to happen, it's going to, and not be looking so far ahead in your life. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen to you from the next day to the next, from one day to the next. Things can happen to alter your course. And if you've made this full-blown plan of what you want, and one little thing gets out of the way, and you don't have the ability to adapt to that change and pivot and do something different, it's going to be a lot harder for you in your life to actually experience fulfillment.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
There always is.
I'm just going to uh, preface this with, yes, truly live your natural self, but social skills or learning social skills, that is that's a process.
It is.
And I went through this past year when I was at a music festival, um, and a lot of opposite sexes intermingling, cross genders intermingling, different sexual orientations, um, and like I said before, you can put yourself out there as much as you humanly want to, um, but like I accidentally hit on the lesbian, like I didn't know.
That's okay. That
I,
you weren't trying to
I,
put labels on the person. You just were
right,
getting to know them, right? Yeah, so that can happen.
yeah, and I the interaction, like, was kind of awkward, but at the same time it was a learning experience, and I feel for myself personally, now, uh like I personally, I don't think that just getting married for the sake of getting married, or like we're in love, we're going to get married. I don't think that's personally a good reason to get married in 2025. I think maybe it's part of the scenario, but I personally think that you need to look at it as an acquisition or a melding towards a better future for both of you. And that's why I think we're going to see, especially like a lot of my friend, like closer friends have done it, is they've married interculturally with Filipino or Asian, or like more of an Eastern philosophy, um, because they were kind of like you said, they were tired of the bar scene, they were tired of the flakiness, and now they're both going on happily married for close to 10 years, because they have someone who supports them, and they have a shared vision, and they're not constantly, unfortunately, being, and I don't want to take this as all women are like this in North America, but they're not being uh, pulled in two separate directions. The two of them are working towards a shared goal or shared vision. And I really think we're going to see more of what they call love tourism. I think love tourism is going to be more of a thing. Um, Another thing that's emerging because of technology is AI girlfriends, AI love. It's kind of weird and fascinating in this at the same time. But like when you're not being able to have your emotional or spiritual needs met, and then you have something that can reciprocate and help you talk through things, that another partner is not there to help you talk through things or work through things. I mean, I think maybe it's a bit of a crutch, it's a bit of a coping mechanism, but at the same time, I didn't grow up post 95 with technology in my hand. I never, that wasn't me. So I can't really judge in that regard. And, maybe long distance things are going to be more of a thing. I think uh, multiple or co-dating or whatever they want to call it now it's going to be more of a thing. I don't really think that putting the pressure on yourself to be with one person and they're just going to meet all of my everything's. I don't think that's going to, as much as it sometimes feels like it could work. I just don't think that we're biologically or anthropologically programmed to be that way. Um, and I personally am just gonna, like you said, I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to try to integrate some more social activities. It's a little bit smaller in a hard town. It's a hard town, a small town. But I'm also looking at prospects of moving uh, more to a southern region where there's more people. I haven't finalized the details yet, but I'm still in the early stages of 2025, and I want my life to be an adventure, and I want ultimately to be free from the rat race, whatever that takes. So if you're just working on your mental point of origin as a man and not putting, like you said, expectations on this has to go somewhere or this must happen or else, like, and that's me sometimes. Like I have to really not pedestalize, and I have to get away from my one-itis tendencies sometimes, because it's just a regression to a previous version of myself, and it's not healthy. And when I do that, and I just leave the possibility of meeting someone to, I don't want to say, well, yeah, I want to say the universe. If I leave it to the universe rather than, like you said, putting expectations and having more of a Taoist approach to things, which is non-action and more of an acceptance of things. And that's why, like I said, like I have, I know we're gonna have to wrap this up pretty soon, so I'm gonna start talking about some of my things. But the Daily Taoist has helped me personally. I'm working on getting that podcast back up and running. The Doomer Bloomers, 12 Pillars to Health, Wealth, and Relationships and or Wisdom. Um, Yukon Gold and All Truths Only. Uh, if you're trying to find me online, the best thing to do realistically is to type in Will Nemo All Truths Only, TREWS, and my LinkedIn will show up, my Twitter will show up. I'm primarily active on Twitter. I really do not use Facebook or Instagram. Um, I have a school community. It's All Truths Only. If you look on the school website, school is spelled with a K, SKOOL. And if you want to join the community, it's free. Um, I'm I'm working on building my my coaching experience. Um, so yeah, drop me a line, and maybe we'll hit it off. So that's all I really have to say, Linda. How about you?
I think we've had a really great conversation here, Will, and we've both shared some perspectives on how we see society, the roles in that men and women play, and the complexities of what it means to be human, and then throw in the whole dating scene in there. There's a lot of learning that needs to take place, and the only way that can happen is with individuals out there providing education and awareness about the tools that can be used to incorporate in their lives, and get into a place, safe place where they can practice the new skills. Because as we all know, um, evolving and growing, it's all about being resilient, and you cannot get a mastery of being resilient until you get courageous and brave, and learn how to pivot and change. And you hit the one thing that I think, if anyone could work on, is dropping the expectations of how things should go. I think that that can go a long ways into a lot of the things that we talked to today. I will do my best to capture all of the different ways that individuals can get out and get in touch with you. They can learn more about the initiatives, podcasting, and coaching that you do. And so, with that, I just want to thank you for joining me today on the Men's Room Show. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome, Linda. And I just want to say, from the fourth dimension and higher, it's the love vibration, guys. We are a unified, we are a unified universe. You are the universe, and the universe is you. And as long as you accept that, you can literally do anything with your life. That's the message that is flowing through me right now. So I love you guys, and thank you, Linda, for having me on the Metro.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you.